Good afternoon. Okay, so in this lecture, we're going to look at abortion and infanticide. Well, what I would like to focus on are two important articles. The first one is by Michael Tooley, and the second one is by Don Marcus. These are two classic, very important, two of the most important articles written about abortion. Now, the Tooley's article is an article in favor of abortion, and the Don Marcus is against abortion. I'm going to link those two articles below the video, okay? But before we get to the actual argumentation, I wanted to mention a few facts about abortion. I guess the history of abortion in the United States can be traced back in 1962 in Phoenix, Arizona. And there's a specific figure, Sherry Finkbein, pregnant woman. During the second month, she took some medicine that caused deformity in the fetus. As a result, she requested an abortion. But the DA at that time obviously said, no. If you do it, you go into jail. So Sherry flew to Sweden, and Sweden at that time, actually, abortion was legal since the 1940s. And so she flew there to get an abortion. However, this event, made the United States pause, okay, and seriously think about the possibility of abortion, since many other countries were already doing it. 18 states started talking about and liberalizing laws about abortion. But it's not that easy. Okay, we can skip that. There's Roe versus Wade. You might have heard of Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade is a landmark case in the history of abortion of the United States. January 22nd, 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, this is the highest court of the United States, okay, in a 7-2 decision, affirms the women's right to have an abortion. And this right is framed under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. I'm going to explain that briefly, but let me start a few years back, few years prior, 1971. The case is filed by Norma McCorvey. I think that's the way you pronounce it. Norma McCorvey. Norma McCorvey is the real name of the woman who is responsible for the legalization of abortion in the United States. Now, as you probably know, for those of you who don't know, when there's a court proceeding and the parties do not want to expose their real names, the courts give them fictitious names, and typically in Anglo-Saxon law, those names are typically Roe, Jane, or Jean, Roe, or Doe, and And so Norma was called in the legal papers Jane Roe. Hence the Roe versus Wade. Wade was Henry Wade, which was the district attorney in Dallas. And at this point, abortion was prohibited. Now, the question that was brought before the court was the following. Does the Constitution in any way embrace the right of women, to obtain an abortion, which would nullify the Texas prohibition? Well, the answer obviously was yes. I say obviously because it's a popular case. It's a landmark case. And initially the answer was yes. Now, of course, nowadays the story is quite different. And we are going to talk about that in a few minutes. But now, this ruling in 1973 allowed for legal abortions during the entire pregnancy. But it set certain conditions depending on the states, the particular state of the union, especially during the second and third trimesters. So, the decision, again, the court held that when essentially this is what the story is. At that time, in 1973, the court said, when you look at the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment grants human beings a right to privacy. And so they framed the right of the legal right of abortion under this guise, this amendment. In other words, the privacy would refer to the privacy of a woman to decide what she wants to do with her own body. The ruling affected laws in 46 states immediately. All right. Now, when you look at the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, Civil Rights of 1868, this was passed by Congress in June 13th, 1866, and ratified on July 9th, 1868. So the 14th Amendment extended liberties and rights granted by the Bill of Rights to formerly enslaved people. The amendment, Section 1, reads as follows. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Okay, there you have it. This is the 14th Amendment, Section 1. And there she is, born September 22nd, 1947, died February 18th, 2017. Now, by the commencement of the court case, Norma, this is the woman that you see on the screen, but by that time, she had already given birth to a baby. But this is not the strangest fact of the story. Because later, Norma, our Norma Jane Roe, changed her mind. She changed sides. In 1997, she started an organization, pro-life organization, named Roe No More. How clever. Roe No More. In 2003, she filed a motion with the U.S. District Court in Dallas with the intent to have the case overturned. The decision, I mean. She asked the court to consider the evidence. She said, I changed my mind, and look at the evidence, court. Abortion hurts women. And she included at least 1,000 affidavits from women who declared that they regretted their abortions, that they were hurt psychologically, not only physically but also psychologically, and so Norma begged the court to overturn the decision. In September 2004, a 3-judge panel of the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals completely dismissed this motion, and that seems to be the end of the story. But before I get to the latest updates, I want to again talk about the law trimester rule that came out of Roe versus Wade. According to the original decision, the 1973 decision, during the first trimester, a woman would have the right to end a pregnancy, and no questions asked by the state. During the second trimester, some states had the power to limit the woman's decision, but not entirely prohibit. So the woman's right to abortion by regulating abortion for the sake, for example, of the woman's health. But after viability, the term viability refers to the time when a fetus is viable, can survive on its own. Typically, that is around week 24, week 28. Between 6 and 7 months. And at this point, different states have the power to regulate or even ban the abortion, except for let's say, to save the life of a woman. Now, just to clarify it, there are medical and surgical abortion. The medical abortion is obviously a non-surgical, and so this is performed by taking certain medicines. It's performed from the time that a woman suspects to be pregnant until 9 weeks from her last menstrual period. Now, the surgical one, on the other hand, is, as the name, the label suggests, is a surgical procedure. There are various surgical procedures. There are those procedures that invade the uterus and kill the fetus first. Some kill the fetus by the administration of drugs first, and then there is a removal. There are various techniques to remove the fetus, and others invade the uterus by abdominal surgery. But we're not getting into that. Okay, you can Google all these procedures. There are various. As a matter of fact, you're going to be able to find pictures, very graphic images of various abortions. But let's go back to the philosophical arguments, because we're not so much interested in, well, at least as far as I'm concerned. I'm not a legal scholar, so I'm not so much interested in what should or should not be legal. But as a philosopher myself and teaching ethics, I'm interested in what is moral and what is not moral. Now, let me explain at this point Michael Tooley's abortion and infanticide. Michael Tooley has a very interesting argument in favor of abortion. And I think that at this point in time, although the paper was published in the 1970s, I don't think that anybody can do much better. So this is, in my view, is an argument that it is as good as it gets. And you don't have to take my word for it. But I think that, personally, I think that this is a very strong argument. Whether I agree with Michael Tooley or disagree, that's a different story. It is irrelevant. But I think that it is a strong argument. Now, Tooley would begin by observing the following, that a common argument, or the most common argument against abortion, okay? He says there are a lot of people who are against abortion. Why? He says, why people are against abortion? Well, typically because they reason as follows. Every person has a right to life. Yes? Okay. The fetus is a person from the moment of conception, from whenever you want. And so it follows from 1 and 2 that the fetus has a right to life. Now, it is wrong to kill something that has a right to life, and because abortion is the killing of a fetus, namely something that has a right to life, then it follows that abortion is morally wrong. Now, Tooley thinks that this argument is not sound. What does that mean, not sound? It means that it might be valid, but some of the premises are false. He specifically denies that the fetus is a person. It is false that a fetus is a person from the moment of conception. And this is the key. This is the linchpin of his argument. And if he is able to demonstrate that a fetus is not a person, then a fetus does not have a right to life. Now, as it happens, the title of Michael Tooley's famous or infamous article is abortion and infanticide, because Tooley is going to argue in the paper, in the article, that even some infants, very, very young, very small infants, well, small, they are small, but early on, many infants are not yet persons, and therefore they don't have the right to life. Now, I want to just say this right off the bat, at the beginning, at the start, because teaching philosophy, sometimes people form the wrong impressions. Michael Tooley is not a monster. Well, maybe he is, and I don't know, but he's not a monster for saying this. He's not suggesting that we should all get an abortion, we should all kill infants. Nothing like that is true. What Michael Tooley in this article is trying to do is he's trying to provide a sophisticated intellectual argument for supporting the idea that abortion is morally permissible. Okay, so let's see how he's going to do it. First of all, Tooley and other people would make a very important distinction, a moral distinction, between the term human or human being, which is a biological designation. A human being is a member of a certain species that we call Homo sapiens. But a person is different. A person is a moral designation, because a person is an individual who is highly intelligent, rational, and self-conscious. Now, as you can see, I hope, this is an important distinction, because in the event that we, let's say, found an alien species that is highly intelligent, rational, and self-conscious, and this individual might not even look like a human being. It might have 3 legs and 4 arms and green and antennas and whatever you want. But if that individual is highly intelligent, rational, and self-conscious, we would call that individual a person. And that is morally significant. So, in other words, Tooley wants to say that the fact that an individual is a human being is not by itself a morally significant fact. On the other hand, a person, if an individual is a person, highly intelligent, rational, and self-conscious, that is an important and morally relevant fact. So, now, Tooley asks, what properties must an organism possess to be a person? And as we will see, a person is something that has a right to life. Tooley's answer is that an organism has a right to life if and only if it possesses the concept of a self as a continuing subject of experiences and other mental states. And 2, that individual, that organism, believes that it is itself such a continuing entity. Let me say a few words about this. The interesting aspect to the possession of the concept of a self as a continuing subject of experiences in other mental states, is that, at least the way I read it, is the following. Imagine, just close your eyes and fantasize. Imagine that there is a human being, just like you and me, and that human being is highly intelligent. This human being can do high-level mathematics. This human being is very eloquent and can solve puzzles and understands logical reasoning, politics, all sorts of things. It's a very, what we would call in lay terms, a very intelligent person. Okay. Now, but suppose that I'm just asking you to suppose. Okay. I know that it's a weird thought experiment, but try just for a moment to imagine a person like that. A very intelligent person. But that person, let's call it Monica or Joe. Okay. Now, Monica is very intelligent, but Monica lacks the concept that she is a continuing subject of experiences in other mental states. As I said, it is a bizarre thought experiment, but just for a moment, bear with my example and think about it. It's important. Imagine that Monica does not have that concept. That Monica is very intelligent. She can do math, read, think about abstract things, but in terms of thinking about Monica, will continue to exist tomorrow. And not only tomorrow, but next year, and in 10 years, hopefully, and maybe in 20 years, and I'm going to have many thoughts in the future, and I'm going to fall in love, and I'm going to get married, and I'm going to teach. I'm going to write poetry, etc. Just suppose for a moment that this bizarre science fiction-y scenario were true. Then even in that case, the simple fact that an organism is very intelligent is not enough. Okay, it's not enough, according to Thule. What you need is the concept that you are a continuing subject of experiences and other mental states. And you believe that you are like that you will continue to exist, and you will have other many mental states and experiences, etc. That's what's fundamental for his argument. This is what Thule calls the self-consciousness requirement, or SCR for short. So the bottom line is that fetuses and infants, many infants, do not have SCR. Do not satisfy SCR. And because they don't satisfy this requirement, that is the bottom line. That is why they do not have a right to life. That's what you need to have a right to life. You need to satisfy the self-consciousness requirement. And so what follows from this is that abortion and infanticide are morally permissible. Now, I'm going to go over this argument fairly quickly, but I want you to pause the video and go over the premises one by one and see how one premise connects to the next and how altogether they lead to a certain conclusion. So the first stage of the argument is that a certain individual, let's call it Red, has a certain right to X. For example, Red might be Michael. Michael has a right to food, right, to access to food, only if Pink, so let's say Maria, has an obligation to refrain from acting in ways that would deprive Michael of food. Now, this Pink, this individual, has such an obligation only if Red desires X. So in this case, Michael desires food, right? You can do this. You can pause the video and think of all your examples and fill in the blank with your own examples. So 3, what follows from 1 and 2, is that Red has a right to X only if Red desires X. Now, the second stage is that Red has a right to life. Now we introduce the idea of life only if Red desires to live. Okay? The right to life is the right to continue to exist as a subject of experiences and other mental states. So it follows that Red has a right to life only if Red desires to continue to exist as a subject of experiences and other mental states. The third stage is that Red desires to continue to exist as a subject of experiences and other mental states only if Red has that concept of a self as a continuing subject of experiences and other mental states. And also, Red believes that it is itself such a subject. So the conclusion would be that Red has a right to life only if Red has the concept of a self as a continuing subject of experiences in other mental states, and believes that Red is itself such a subject. Clearly, you can see where this is going, because a fetus, while a fetus is alive, and despite the fact that you might say a fetus is a human being, see, for Thule, these facts are irrelevant, because Thule is asking, what is the ground for the right to life? So, is the argument valid? Well, it seems to be valid, but a key step is premise 3, namely that one has the right to something, to X, only if one desires X. Now, is this claim plausible? Thule wants to qualify the claim by saying the following. There might be a situation where an individual, an organism, lacks a desire to life due to a temporary psychological derangement, right? Suppose that I have become deeply depressed and so life has no meaning for me. Thule says, well, this is an exception because that person is temporarily depressed, so we shouldn't judge based on the fact that at this particular moment that this individual is very depressed and she doesn't desire to live. Let's not judge by that because it's an exception. Another situation may be that a person lacks the desire due to temporary unconsciousness. And this is obvious, right? When you go to sleep, you don't desire to live when you are unconscious or in a coma. But it would be absurd to say that when you're in a coma or you're not actively interested in continuing to exist consciously, it would be absurd to say that you lose the right to life. Another situation would be brainwashing, when an individual is the victim of brainwashing or indoctrination. And there are many examples of religious or pseudo-religious sects where they brainwash, where they indoctrinate the people, their followers, to the point where they you have those mass suicide events that happen, right? But even in that case, it would seem plausible that a person who's indoctrinated or brainwashed still have the right to life, right? So these situations suggest that red or an individual, an organism, has the right to X only if red desires X, or there are these exceptions, right? Emotional imbalance or derangement, unconsciousness, brainwashing, etc. I quote, Tooley says, to sum up, my argument has been that having a right to life presupposes something. It presupposes that an individual is capable of desiring to continue existing as a subject of experiences in other mental states. But this in turn presupposes both that an individual has the concept of being a continuing entity, and that one believes that one is oneself such an entity that desires and that continues to exist, is going to exist here in the future, and will have and has and will have many mental states and desires and so on. So an entity that lacks such a consciousness of itself as a continuing subject of mental states does not have a right to life. I mean, Tooley says, what else is a right to life? Because if you don't even understand what life is, if you don't understand, not you, if an organism does not have the understanding of what that organism is, and that organism has a desire to live and understands that organism will continue to exist as long as no one kills it, well, that is what confers upon that organism a right to life. Anything else is just not plausible enough. For example, he has 5 examples. One is viability. The second is birth. The third is the ability to move spontaneously. The fourth is the attainment of human form. And the last one is conception. Now think about viability and birth. Why should the ability to survive outside the womb give one the right to life? Well, it's not sufficient, because what happened there? It's not sufficient. As a matter of fact, to prove it, think about the following. If a fetus, for the sake of argument, imagine that a fetus inside the womb were conscious. The fetus could think, could understand, when I get out of here, let's say, for example, the fetus says to itself, hey, when I get out of here, I'm going to have me a tall bottle of mama's milk. Okay? And then when I grow up, I'm going to buy a house and live and have babies and have fun. Don't you think that if that were the case, we would assign that individual, that fetus, a right to life? I mean, it would be obvious, right? Because that's what it is. We would know that the fetus understands certain concepts. What about the ability to move spontaneously? Well, clearly this is not a viable criterion for the right to life, because some individuals are paralyzed that they cannot move spontaneously. What about the attainment of human form? Well, this seems to be speciesist, because why should we attribute the right to life only to human beings? What about conception? Well, the fetus is a person from the moment of conception. This is the conservative position, the traditional position. It says, the fetus becomes a person from the moment of conception. Now, the problem is this. Adult humans automatically have a right to life. But this is false. They don't. The second assumption is that if an organism has the potential to become an adult, then the organism has a right to life right now, prior to having that developed mental framework. But this is not the case. This is false. So Tooley has a very interesting and bizarre argument. Now, while I said, remember I said at the beginning of the video that I think that Tooley's argument is solid, that it's a compelling argument. I'm not so sure if this is a good argument against the conservative position. Listen to this argument. He says, suppose that a chemical, when injected into the brain of a kitten, causes the kitten to develop a brain like the one of a functional, highly functional, intelligent human being. You have to imagine that after injecting this serum, the kitten starts thinking like an intelligent human being and even starts using language. Now, if an adult human have a right to life, then it follows that a kitten has a right to life. But Tooley says, but it would not be seriously wrong to refrain from injecting this serum, this chemical, into the kitten, so that the kitten would develop a mind, a brain like that of an intelligent human. Okay? So, it would not be seriously wrong to neutralize the development of an injected kitten. Okay? So, imagine that you have this chemical. Would it be wrong not to inject the kitten? Tooley says it wouldn't be seriously wrong. And if it is not seriously wrong to not inject the kitten, thereby neutralizing the development of the injected kitten, well, then it follows that it is not seriously wrong to neutralize the development of a fetus, because when you think about it, not giving the serum, the chemical, to the kitten is logically equivalent, according to Tooley, logically equivalent to not allowing the fetus to further develop or to fully develop into a human being. And so the fetus does not have a right to life. It might have a right to life if the fetus is allowed to become a person, but not yet. Okay? And isn't it wrong to take steps that will neutralize that development? Well, no, because if it is, then Tooley says, then it would seem that it would be wrong to neutralize the possibility in an injected kitten. But it doesn't seem seriously wrong to do so. And because they are logically equivalent, according to Tooley, then it follows that the fetus does not have a right to life either. Okay, you can pause the video and go back and work your way through the argumentation. I don't want to have a 3-hour video, so in the interest of brevity, I'm trying to explain the main points, and we can have a discussion. You can contact me, or we can talk about it in class. Each point, obviously there's a lot to be said for each point. But in this video, the purpose of this video is to just break down the argument, okay, for your understanding, because it's very complex. So what I want to do now is to present the next argument, which is not as complex, but it's very powerful, I think. Why abortion is immoral. Now, Don Marcus, and that's the way you pronounce it, by the way, Don Marcus, presents an argument that is against abortion. Not categorically, mind you, but in most cases, Don Marcus says that logically we have a strong argument for, against abortion. Now, the first step for Don Marcus is the following: the personhood arguments. On the one hand, there is this argument: a fetus is human. 2, humans have rights. 3, conclusion of abortion is impermissible. Now, Don Marcus reflects on this argument and concludes that this argument is fallacious. Why? Because in this case, it is unclear the connection between biology and morality. In other words, if the term human implies that there's something moral about human, then the argument is question begging, because a fetus is human, humans have rights. But why do humans have rights? Because they're humans. Yes, but why do they have rights? Because they have rights. It seems that it's circular in that sense. So you need the missing step, the missing link between being a human and having rights, moral rights. On the other side, the other argument is the following. A fetus is not a person. 2, an individual that is not a person lacks rights, and therefore they lack the right to life. And so the conclusion would be that abortion is morally permissible if that individual is not a person. Now, Don Marcus makes the brilliant observation that it is equally unclear what connection psychology has to morality. Because if you say personhood, the concept of a person, and you assume that a person, now remember, Thule, for example, assumes that only a person has the right to life. Now, Don Marcus says, if you assume that a personhood, that person is a moral term, then again, the argument is question begging, because a fetus is not a person. Non-persons have no rights, therefore abortion is permissible. But why is a non-person a moral term? Why is it that a person, which is a psychological concept, why is it that that psychological concept or a certain psychology entails a certain moral right? That's what's not clear. So, Marcus' thesis then is that one plausible reason that we can give for the moral wrongness of killing any adult, in most cases, of course, in a normal case, the same reasons apply equally well to most cases of abortion. Most cases, not all. Now, I want you to, just for a moment, if you want to challenge yourself, pause this video for a moment and think about it. Why would you say that it is wrong, morally wrong, to kill an adult person? I'm talking about an innocent, highly functional, intelligent, sensitive, good person. An adult. Why is it wrong? What makes it wrong? It certainly seems that the wrongness of killing an adult must be located in what it does to the victim. Killing deprives a victim of something morally valuable. Killing deprives a person of that person's life. More specifically, Marcus says that killing is wrong because it deprives a person from that person's future. Okay? It is morally wrong to kill an innocent person because that person has a future like our future. Now, a fetus might or might not be a person, but that's irrelevant. What is morally relevant is the fact that that fetus has a future like ours. So abortion is wrong for the same reason that murder of innocent adults is wrong. And that is, it deprives the victim of the value of its future. So the argument would be the following. Killing is wrong because it deprives its victim or victims of the value of a future like ours. 2, fetuses clearly, obviously, have a future like ours. Therefore, it follows that abortion is wrong. There might be other cases that Marcus contemplates. For example, his argument does not forbid voluntary euthanasia, right? Because, think about it. Suppose that a person has a terminal disease. Well, then in that case, euthanasia would not be morally wrong, at least not seriously morally wrong, shouldn't be forbidden, because it is not the privation of a future like ours. Contraception also is not morally wrong because contraception does not kill anything that has a future. Remember, contraception might kill a sperm or might kill the other thing or the egg, but those two, when they're separated, they are nothing. They don't have a future. Now, a zygote, on the other hand, the union of sperm with the egg, from that point on, that thing acquires the potential of a future like ours. So at that point, would be wrong to do it. Also, killing in general is not forbidden by this argument because there might be situations where a person, a human being, despite the fact that that human being might have a future like ours, well, that future is, while it might be important to have that future to that person, but it might not be important in a different sense. For example, think about Mussolini or Hitler, where although these individuals presumably valued their individual lives, well, it might be argued that for the good of humanity, it is morally permissible, or we have a moral justification in killing that person. But again, it's not part of the argument. The point is that the future like ours is not categorical. There might be exceptions where it is necessary to kill another person in order to cause a greater good, for example. Okay, this is what I just explained, right? Voluntary euthanasia is permissible if the future holds no value to that person. Interestingly, Marcus says that this is different from the ordinary case of suicide because a person's future, in most cases, does have a value to that person, even when a person is depressed and wants to kill himself or herself. Contraception, as I said, the individual sperm and egg doesn't have a future like ours. The zygote does. Okay. Two cases when this argument allows abortion would be, one is when the fetus, if born, would be so handicapped that it would not be capable of having any future experiences, like anencephalic baby born without parts of the brain and skull. Or two, when the fetus, if born, would be so defective that all its experiences would be so unpleasant. For example, that person would be in constant excruciating pain. And it would be obvious that his or her life will be absolutely disastrous and unbearable. Okay, so this is the end. As I said, you can pause the video, think very hard about every premise of the arguments, think about the arguments, and feel free to contact me. Feel free to ask me questions. Obviously for my students, you have the benefit of having me in class, so we can have these discussions in the classroom. Remember, as I said, I'm going to you're going to find the link to those two articles down below the video. And for anything else, let me know. Contact me and feel free to ask questions. Otherwise, thank you for another video, and I will see you soon.